Welcome back. We now return to the Austrian School to look at its most formidable polemicist and theorist of capital, Eugen von Böhm-Bawerk.
Indeed. And here we are, episode 6 of our series on 10 great economists. Feels like a big shift, doesn't it?
A huge shift. Last time we were deep in the weeds with Vilfredo Pareto, mapping out this big sociological landscape.
And now we're pivoting pretty hard. We're moving away from that sociological view and right back to the analytical heart of the Austrian School, picking up where Karl Marx left off.
And what a figure to pick up with. I mean, the sources we're using, especially Schumpeter's analysis, they don't pull any punches.
Not at all.
Schumpeter just comes right out and puts Böhm-Bawerk in the absolute top tier. He calls him, without any hesitation, one of the 5 or 6 great economists of all time.
And coming from Schumpeter, that's really saying something. He was not a man who gave out praise lightly.
Right. It tells you immediately that we're dealing with someone who didn't just tweak a few ideas. He fundamentally changed the game.
He really did. And his contribution, his big mission, was to tackle what was probably the single most difficult, most politically loaded question in all of classical economics.
Which was?
The nature of interest. What is it? Why does it exist? And is the net return that capitalists get from it legitimate?
It really was the Achilles heel of 19th century economics, wasn't it?
Yeah.
If you can't explain profit and interest on purely economic grounds,
then the whole system looks vulnerable. It opens the door to the argument that it's all just, exploitation.
And that's exactly the door Böhm-Bawerk intended to slam shut.
Precisely. He set out to provide a really robust, deep, and consistent explanation that tied Menger's subjective value theory directly into the mechanics of how we produce things over time.
Okay, so that really sets the stage for this deep dive. It seems like we have 3 big areas to cover.
I think so. First, we have to understand the man himself. This incredible force of intellect, but also, weirdly, a very successful politician.
Right, the statesman scientist. Then second, we have to get into his famous critique of all the other interest theories, the demolition job he did.
Especially on Marx. That's the main event for that part.
And then third, after tearing everything else down, we have to look at what he built, his own positive theory.
The agio theory. The idea that interest is basically the price of time.
It's a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
But it sounds like if you want to understand modern capital theory, this is the guy you have to go through.
It's the shortcut. He laid the foundation for how we think about capital, time, and how income gets distributed.
All right, let's start with the man himself. This rare combination of talents that Schumpeter talks about. It's one thing to be a brilliant academic, but Böhm-Bawerk was something else entirely.
That's the key detail, isn't it? He wasn't just living in an ivory tower writing obscure papers.
Right.
He was a highly effective, very successful minister of finance for Austria, a job that Schumpeter says required the skills of the rarest of statesmen.
I mean, think about that. He's managing the finances of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, this sprawling, crumbling entity, and he's doing it successfully.
What's so fascinating is how our source material connects his two worlds. His political work and his scientific work weren't separate. They came from the same place.
The same DNA, as Schumpeter puts it. His political work had the same, what is the phrase? Constructive vigor, clear view of reality, mastery of obstacles.
Yes, he was a builder. Whether he was building a theory of capital or a national budget, the approach was the same. Meticulous, logical, and incredibly forceful.
This constructive vigor, it must have made him a pretty intimidating figure.
Oh, absolutely. The sources describe him as a redoubtable debater, someone who inspired both fear and respect. You did not want to be on the other side of an argument with him, whether it was in Parliament or in a journal.
And he was fighting for some pretty unpopular ideas at the time, right? Sound money, balanced budgets.
In a place and time where that was almost a superhuman task. But what's really interesting is that the sources note he fought without bitterness. It was never personal. It was just an intense, analytical, self-controlled pursuit of what he saw as the logical truth.
So an intellectual force of nature. Which brings us to his starting point as a theorist. When he decided to take on this massive project, he made a very clear choice.
A very clear choice. He said, "My foundation is Karl Marx."
He didn't try to create his own rival school.
No, not at all. He saw himself as Menger's ally, the person who would take Menger's core insight and build a complete system out of it.
And that system was going to be a comprehensive theory of the entire economic process.
Ah.
But with one problem right at the center of it all.
Interest and capital.
But why? Why was that the single problem that he felt this burning need to solve above all others?
Because he understood something that, according to Schumpeter, really only Marx had fully grasped before him.
And what was that?
That the entire justification for the capitalist system rested on this one question. If you can't explain where profit comes from, if it's not rooted in some fundamental economic law,
then it's just arbitrary. It's just power. It's just, as Marx would say, exploitation.
Exactly. The theory of interest wasn't some minor technical issue. It was the keystone holding up the entire arch. You pull it out, the whole thing collapses.
So that was his mission.
Right.
But the intellectual climate at the time wasn't exactly welcoming for this kind of work, was it?
Not at all. The kind of abstract, rigorous, theoretical thinking that Menger and Böhm-Bawerk were doing was viewed with a lot of suspicion.
Especially by the German historical school, which was dominant then.
Right. So he wasn't just building a theory. He constantly had to defend his methods, his assumptions, his very right to think abstractly.
It sounds exhausting.
It must have been. And it meant that his first major work wasn't even his positive theory. It was this massive critical volume where he just takes apart every other theory of interest that had ever been proposed.
He's not building yet. He's just clearing the land.
That's the perfect metaphor. Schumpeter says he was fighting for a clearing on which to build the structure.
And how many theories did he go after?
The sources say he reviewed over 20 different ones. It was this huge intellectual house cleaning. Schumpeter calls it an operation necessary not merely to save time, but to save the public from confusion. He had to sweep away decades of error before he could even begin.
Okay, so that need for intellectual clearing brings us right to his role as the great polemicist. He's taking his analytical sledgehammer to all these competing ideas, especially the exploitation theories.
And Marx is a bullseye right in the center of that target.
But his starting point, his criterion for judgment, it all goes back to Menger, right?
Always. For Böhm-Bawerk, the fundamental explanatory principle must be a theory of value. Full stop. Value, he believed, is the prime mover of the economic cosmos. So if your theory of interest doesn't flow directly from a coherent theory of value, it's dead on arrival.
Okay, so using that standard, what were the big categories of failure he identified?
He lumps them into three main groups. First, you have the productivity theories.
The ones that say interest comes from the fact that capital makes labor more productive.
Exactly. But he points out the flaw. They confuse physical productivity with value productivity. Yes, a tractor helps you grow more wheat than your bare hands, a physical surplus. But why does that extra wheat translate into a net financial return for the tractor's owner?
They missed the step of explaining the value part.
They completely missed it. Then second, you have the abstinence theories, the idea that interest is a reward for saving.
For being frugal.
Right. And he says, look, saving is obviously necessary. You need it to form capital. But it doesn't explain the reason for the return or why it's a certain amount. It explains the supply of capital, maybe, but not the demand for it or the price that emerges.
And that leaves the third, and for him, the most dangerous group.
Exploitation theories. And the giant in that room is Karl Marx.
So what was his core criticism of Marx? He said they failed to show, what was it?
Why the forces of competition will not wash the exploitative gain away. That's the heart of it.
Okay, let's break that down because it's so important. First, we need a quick, sharp summary of Marx's argument. How does exploitation actually happen in his system?
It all starts with the labor theory of value. Marx argues the value of anything is just the labor time needed to produce it. Now, what a capitalist buys from a worker isn't their labor, but their labor power, their ability to work for a day.
And the capitalist pays the full value of that labor power.
Yes, this is crucial. The wage is fair in the marketplace. It's equal to the labor time needed to produce the worker's subsistence. Food, shelter, the things they need to show up for work again tomorrow.
Okay, so if the transaction is fair, where does the exploitation come in?
It comes in the use of what was bought. The capitalist might pay for labor power that takes, say, 6 hours of work to produce, but the workday is 10 hours long. Those extra 4 hours are unpaid labor. The worker produces value in those 4 hours that they don't get paid for. The capitalist just takes it. That difference is the surplus value, or Mehrwert. And that surplus value is the source of all profit.
And that, for Marx, is the definition of exploitation. It's built into the system.
It's the engine of the system. Now, Böhm-Bawerk's attack on this, as Schumpeter lays it out, is devastating. One of the biggest problems is what later economists called the transformation problem.
Okay, what is the transformation problem? This sounds critical.
It is. Marx's system requires two things to be true at once. One, value is determined by labor time. 2, competition equalizes the rate of profit across all industries.
But what if one industry uses tons of machines and very few workers, and another uses almost all workers and very few machines?
Exactly. Let's call them Industry A, labor-intensive, and Industry B, capital-intensive. If profit comes only from surplus value extracted from labor, then Industry A should be wildly more profitable.
But competition won't allow that. Capital would flood into Industry A until the profit rates were the same everywhere.
Precisely. So to make the profit rates equal, the prices of goods in the real world have to deviate or transform away from their pure labor values. The capital-intensive goods have to sell for more than their labor value, and the labor-intensive goods for less.
So the very thing that drives the system competition ends up breaking the fundamental rule that value comes from labor.
It's a massive internal contradiction, and Böhm-Bawerk seized on it. He argued that Marx had simply failed to see the real underlying economic law that was actually creating this value difference, a law that has nothing to do with ownership.
And this is where he deploys his ultimate weapon, the one that reframes the whole debate.
The socialist test.
Yeah, explain this. It sounds profound.
It is. He says, okay, let's get rid of the capitalists. Let's imagine a centrally planned socialist state. The planner has to decide what to do with the workers.
Okay, I'm the planner. What are my options?
You can have your workers spend a year making bread and clothes goods for immediate consumption. Or you can have them spend a year building a highly advanced automated factory that won't produce anything for 5 years.
But when it does start producing, it will churn out way more bread and clothes.
Way more. Now, if you, the planner, value goods only by the labor that went into them, then the value of the future factory output is the same as the value of the immediate bread and clothes. Both took a year of labor.
So there'd be no reason to ever build the factory. You'd just be delaying consumption for no extra gain in value.
Exactly. The society would stagnate. To make a rational choice, you, the planner, must value the present goods more highly than the future goods. You have to apply a discount factor. That difference in value, that premium on present resources, is an agio.
And that agio is functionally identical to interest or profit.
It is, whatever you call it, a social dividend, a reinvestment fund. It's an income that is not a wage. It's a return based on time.
So Böhm-Bawerk's conclusion is that exploitation would have to exist even in a socialist state.
Yes. Which means it's not an exploitation at all. It's not a feature of the power structure. It's a fundamental feature of reality. The problem isn't capitalism. The problem is scarcity in time.
So after completely demolishing the old theories, Böhm-Bawerk finally gets to start building his own. And he starts, it seems, with a very precise definition of capital itself, centered on this idea of roundabout production.
Yes, this is his foundation. He had to define capital in a way that connects what it does technically, as a tool, with what it represents in value terms, as a source of profit.
He didn't want to just say capital is a pile of money or a stock of goods.
No, that's too simple. He gets at it through this concept of roundaboutness. Let's use a simple example to make it really clear.
Yeah.
The most direct way to catch a fish is to wade into the water and try to grab it with your hands.
Which is not very effective.
Not at all. The roundabout way is to first spend a day on the shore, not fishing, but weaving a net or carving a spear. You're delaying consumption. You're not getting any fish today.
But tomorrow, with that net or spear, you'll catch far more fish for the same amount of effort.
That's it. That is the philosophy of tools in a nutshell. The key insight is that the same amount of original labor produces a much larger final result if you apply it indirectly through these roundabout ways. And capital goods, the net, the spear, the factory, are just the intermediate products you create along that roundabout path.
This seems pretty intuitive, but he immediately adds a crucial constraint, doesn't he? The law of decreasing returns to roundaboutness.
Right. It's not a magic bullet. The law states that as you make the production process more and more roundabout, you still get more output, but the additional output you get from each extension gets smaller and smaller.
So going from your bare hands to a spear is a massive jump in productivity.
Huge.
Going from a simple spear to a fancy fishing rod is a smaller jump. And going from a fancy rod to a giant computer-guided fishing trawler is an even smaller marginal gain.
Precisely. This diminishing return is the objective, technical fact that stops us from just extending the production period out to infinity. There's a limit.
And that technical limit is then constrained by an economic reality, the thing he calls the subsistence fund.
Yes, and this is the piece that links the whole production structure back to actual human beings living in time.
Okay, explain the subsistence fund carefully, because it sounds a bit like the old wages fund idea, which got a bad rap.
It's a critical distinction. The subsistence fund is simply the total stock of finished consumer goods that a society has on hand. It's the food, clothing, and shelter that's already been produced.
And its purpose is to keep everyone alive during the roundabout production process.
Exactly. If you're going to spend 5 years building a dam, you and all the other dam builders still need to eat for those 5 years. The subsistence fund is what you live on.
So how is that different from the rigid old wages fund?
The old theory saw it as a fixed pot of money for wages. Böhm-Bawerk saw the fund as flexible. It's not a rigid amount for wages. It's a stock of goods that determines how long and how capital-intensive a production process a society can afford to undertake.
So a bigger fund means you can afford to take on longer, more productive, more roundabout projects.
Right. A small fund means you're stuck with very direct short-term production just to survive. So the fund becomes this crucial link between what you've saved in the past and what you're able to produce in the future.
Okay, but this brings up a really tricky question. If you have labor, land, and a capital good like an oven all working together to make bread, how do you figure out how much the bread's value came from the oven specifically? The problem of imputation.
This was the analytical knot that the classical economists just could not untie. Because like you said, if you take away the baker, you get no bread. Take away the oven, no bread. Take away the flour, no bread. Everything seems essential.
So how did Böhm-Bawerk, building on Menger, solve it?
He solved it by thinking on the margin. You don't ask what happens if you take away all the ovens. You ask what happens if I add or subtract one oven or one baker or one bag of flour.
The marginal contribution.
The marginal contribution. If adding one more baker allows you to produce 10 more loaves of bread, the value of that baker's labor is imputed to be the value of those 10 loaves minus the cost of the extra flour and oven time they used.
You work backwards from the final consumer good. The value of the bread determines the value of the oven, not the other way around.
That's the Mengerian revolution. Value is imputed backwards from consumption. And because of this, Böhm-Bawerk showed you could figure out a uniquely determined marginal value for every single factor of production land, labor, capital goods.
And that discovery, that's the foundation of the whole modern theory of how income is distributed, isn't it? Marginal productivity theory.
It's the bedrock. It explains where wages, rent, and, as we'll see, the return to capital all come from. It was a massive analytical breakthrough.
We've cleared the battlefield, we've built the structure of capital, now we get to the payoff. Böhm-Bawerk's own positive theory of interest, the agio theory.
This is the capstone of the entire system, and the core thesis is, in a way, incredibly simple. Present goods are valued more highly than future goods of the same kind and quantity. That's it.
And interest is just the price of that difference.
It's the market price, the agio, that expresses that universal subjective preference. It's not exploitation, it's not a reward, it's just a price, like any other price.
So the interest rate you see at the bank is just the market working out the premium you need to pay someone to get them to trade something they have now for a promise of something in the future.
That's exactly it. And Böhm-Bawerk was incredibly systematic about this. He didn't just state it, he laid out 3 separate independent reasons why this preference for the present is a fundamental part of any human economy.
Okay, let's walk through those 3 causes. What's the first one?
The first is about expectations. He called it expected larger provision. Basically, most people expect to be better off in the future.
They expect to have more money, be more secure.
Right. So the marginal utility of $1 to you today, when you might be struggling, is much higher than the marginal utility of $1 to your richer future self.
So to get me to give up a high-utility dollar today, you have to promise me more than one low-utility dollar in the future. You have to compensate me.
That's the logic. It's a perfectly rational calculation based on diminishing marginal utility over time.
Okay, what's the second cause?
The second is more about our human flaws. He calls it a systematic underestimation of future wants. This is just pure psychology.
You mean impatience, lack of willpower.
Exactly. We have a defective telescopic faculty, as an earlier economist put it. Future needs seem hazy and distant, while present desires are vivid and demanding. We just systematically discount the future.
It's the marshmallow test, writ large across the whole economy. The desire for the new phone now versus the need for a retirement fund in 30 years.
That's a perfect example. So those first 2 reasons establish the subjective psychological demand for present goods. But the third reason is objective and technical.
And this must tie back to roundabout production.
It does. The third cause is the technical superiority of roundaboutness. As we established, labor applied today in a roundabout process will yield a larger physical product in the future.
So even if I'm a perfectly rational, infinitely patient person, so the first two reasons don't apply to me, I would still value present goods more.
Why?
Because I can use those present goods, my labor, my resources, to start a roundabout process that will give me an objectively larger pile of stuff later. A present good contains a greater future potential.
You've got it. So all three causes point in the same direction. Our psychological impatience meets this incredible technical opportunity. The result is a massive, constant, underlying demand for present goods over future goods.
So how does the market take all that pressure and turn it into a single number, the rate of interest?
That's where the market for loans comes in. You have savers supplying present goods and entrepreneurs and consumers demanding them. And Böhm-Bawerk uses his idea of marginal pairs to explain how the price is set.
The person who is just barely willing to lend and the person who is just barely willing to borrow.
Their valuations set the market clearing price, the uniform agio. And the capitalist in this picture is simply a merchant of present goods.
They're advancing the subsistence fund to workers and landowners, bridging that time gap.
And the workers and entrepreneurs are happy to pay the agio, to accept a wage that's less than the full future value of what they'll produce, because it allows them to start that more productive roundabout process now. The gain from the process is bigger than the cost of the interest.
And because the subsistence fund is always limited.
And because there are always more, longer, potentially profitable roundabout methods we could be using.
There's always more demand for present goods than there is supply. So their price has to be higher than par. The agio interest is inevitable.
It's an inevitable price that arises from the reality of scarcity and time. And this completely reframes the whole function of interest in the economy.
It's not just a price for money. It becomes a regulator.
The ultimate regulator. Schumpeter says it acts as the brake or the governor on the whole system.
What does that mean?
Without interest, without that price on time, everyone would try to start the longest, most productive projects imaginable all at once.
And we would run out of present goods. We'd starve tomorrow because we were trying to build a perfect world for 50 years from now.
Exactly. The interest rate forces us to balance the technically possible with the economically viable. It prevents the economy from trying to lengthen the production period beyond what the current subsistence fund can actually support.
It's the price that balances our desire for a better future with our need to survive today.
It is the price that rations time itself.
So as we bring this all together, let's look at the incredible synthesis and the legacy Böhm-Bawerk left behind. His theory wasn't just about interest. It solved other long-standing economic puzzles, too.
Absolutely. One of the big ones was explaining why the rate of interest tends to fall over time as societies get wealthier, the law of the decreasing rate of interest.
And how did his system explain that?
It flows logically from everything we've discussed. He argued that as a nation reaches a higher cultural level, which is his term for becoming wealthier and more capital-intensive, its subsistence fund grows larger.
It has more accumulated savings, more consumer goods on hand.
Right. And a larger fund allows that society to engage in longer, more complex, more roundabout methods of production.
But we already know from the law of decreasing returns to roundaboutness that those extra long processes, while still productive, offer a smaller marginal gain.
Exactly. So the surplus return you get from extending the production period from, say, 10 years to 11 years is smaller than the return you got going from 1 year to 2.
Yeah.
And since the rate of interest reflects that surplus return,
It has to fall.
it has to fall. It's an incredibly elegant explanation for a major historical trend.
It also reframes how we see interest rates. A high interest rate suggests a society that is, for lack of a better word, poor and impatient.
It signals a severe scarcity of present goods. People are focused on short-term survival. A low interest rate suggests a wealthy, patient society that can afford to plan for the long term.
He also managed to finally connect the two great principles of price theory, the law of costs and the law of marginal utility.
This was a huge deal. For a long time, they seemed like two separate competing ideas. One said price is determined by subjective value. The other said price tends toward its cost of production.
And Böhm-Bawerk.
He showed that the law of costs is just a corollary, a special case of the law of marginal utility.
How so?
Because costs themselves are not fundamental. The cost of the oven or the flour is determined by the subjective value consumers place on the final product, the bread. Value is imputed backwards.
So subjective valuations drive everything. They determine the price of the final good, which in turn determines the costs of the factors of production.
Exactly. It unified the whole theory of price into a single, coherent system rooted in subjective human choice. And it's that completeness, that organic wholeness, that led to Schumpeter's incredible final praise.
The line about him unfolding the theory of the socio-economic process for the first time as an organic whole of valuations and objective facts. It really does sound like he created a complete system.
He did, and Schumpeter was amazed by how he did it. He points out Böhm-Bawerk's unconscious mathematics, meaning he rarely used any equations or graphs, unlike some of his contemporaries, but his verbal logic was so precise, so structured, that he was essentially solving complex mathematical problems through prose. Schumpeter said he had an unerring feeling for the logical necessities of his argument.
And that intellectual power clearly wasn't lost on his contemporaries. You mentioned Frank Taussig, the great American economist of that time.
Taussig had immense respect for him. He saw Böhm-Bawerk as one of the few thinkers on the same level as David Ricardo, someone with the rare ability to see the deep structural problems of the economy and build a massive analytical machine to solve them. The agio theory wasn't just another idea, it was a paradigm shift.
So, to try and summarize this immense achievement, he cleared away all the flawed theories of interest, especially the Marxist exploitation claim. He gave us a rigorous definition of capital based on roundabout production and the subsistence fund, and he grounded the rate of interest in the fundamental scarcity of present goods, his agio theory.
And that leads to the final provocative thought that we should leave everyone with. The agio theory implies that the rate of interest is more than just a financial number. It's a mirror.
A mirror of what?
A mirror of a nation's cultural level and its moral strength, because it is the objective market price that reflects the relative intensity with which people in that society value the future versus the present.
It's a number that quantifies patience.
In a very real sense, yes.
Yeah.
And it means that interest is an economic reality that has to be managed, not something that can just be wished away.
Even a benevolent central planner, as we saw in the socialist test, would have to invent a rate of interest to make rational decisions over time. It is an inescapable consequence of living in a world where production takes time and the future is uncertain.
It is the economic price we pay for foresight.
A powerful framework for thinking about everything, from our personal savings to national policy. Next time, we move on in our series on 10 great economists to look at a figure whose own work on money would also deeply influence the field of economic theory. Until then, keep digging.